Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin with a question. When was the last time you consciously reset your brain? Most people think of resetting their devices more often than their own minds. But unlike machines, our brains aren't designed for constant input, notifications, and stress without strategic periods of recalibration. The good news is, resetting your brain doesn't require a complete life overhaul. It just needs science-backed habits applied with precision. The human brain is a remarkable, adaptable organ composed of billions of neurons that continuously form, strengthen, and weaken connections based on our behavior and environment. These patterns of neural activity, what we commonly refer to as habits, thoughts, or emotional reactions, are not random. They are the physical manifestations of repeated experiences encoded in neural circuits through a process known as neuroplasticity. This means that everything you consistently do, think, or feel leaves a trace in the architecture of your brain. Over time, the brain becomes more efficient at repeating those behaviors or emotional responses, even if they are harmful or unproductive. When people say they feel stuck, overwhelmed, or trapped in mental loops, what they are often describing is the manifestation of deeply wired patterns in the brain that have been reinforced through repetition. What's important to understand is that the brain doesn't judge the value of the patterns it encodes. It simply responds to frequency. If you start every morning checking your phone for notifications, your brain begins to associate wakefulness with external stimulation and digital engagement. Over time, this becomes automatic. If you constantly respond to stress with procrastination, your brain learns that avoidance provides temporary relief, and it wires in that behavior. These circuits are efficient but not always optimal. They can lead to burnout, anxiety, low motivation, or poor cognitive performance. The result is a brain that is not malfunctioning, but rather performing exactly as it has been trained to do over and over again. This is why resetting the brain must begin with disrupting and rewiring these patterns rather than blaming yourself for how you feel. The concept of reset isn't about erasing your brain or returning to a blank slate. It's about interrupting automatic, maladaptive loops and consciously directing neuroplasticity toward more useful, healthy behaviors. One of the first steps is awareness. You need to identify which thought patterns or habits are being reinforced daily. For example, if you find yourself frequently distracted, it's likely that your attention circuits have been conditioned to seek novelty, particularly through digital devices. If you experience chronic stress, your brain may be locked into overactive threat responses that amplify even minor challenges. Once you're aware of the patterns, the next phase is intervention. Neuroscience shows us that even a small shift in behavior can begin to destabilize entrenched neural circuits. This is often referred to as synaptic pruning in neurobiology. Connections that are no longer used begin to weaken. Conversely, when you introduce new behaviors and repeat them consistently, new synaptic pathways begin to form and strengthen. This is why consistency is critical. You don't need to make massive life changes overnight. You need to make small, strategic adjustments that are repeated often enough to become the new default wiring of your brain. Let's take the example of stress response. If your brain has learned to perceive emails, deadlines, or social tension as threats, it will repeatedly activate the sympathetic nervous system, releasing cortisol and adrenaline. Over time, this state of hyperarousal becomes normalized, and your brain starts functioning in a survival mode that impairs rational thinking, memory, and even immune function. But if you learn to recognize the early signs of this stress loop and introduce a simple downregulation strategy, such as deep breathing or a short walk, at the moment it begins, you start to create an alternative response pattern. With repetition, the brain begins to associate those same stress triggers with a calming behavior rather than panic. That's the reset process in action, real-time rewiring through deliberate input. Another essential concept is that motivation, focus, and emotional regulation are also trainable states. These are not fixed traits. You are not permanently bad at focus or anxious by nature. You are experiencing the downstream effects of how your neural circuits have been shaped. Just as muscles grow in response to specific resistance training, your brain's networks for attention, executive function, and resilience grow when you challenge and support them consistently. Resetting the brain requires both neurochemical support, through proper sleep, nutrition, and light exposure, and cognitive engagement through mindful habits, learning, and reflection. These two domains work together to optimize your brain's ability to adapt. The beauty of neuroplasticity is that it works both ways. No matter how long a pattern has existed, it can be changed, but the brain requires evidence through behavior. It listens to what you do far more than what you intend. If you want a different outcome, whether it's more clarity, calm, or creativity, you have to give your brain a reason to rewire. This is not about willpower. It's about repetition and alignment with how the brain naturally adapts. The reset begins the moment you take ownership of that process and engage with it, one input at a time. Light is one of the most powerful regulators of the human brain, and yet it is often the most overlooked. While we tend to think of nutrition, sleep, or exercise as central to mental and physical health, few realize that when and how you are exposed to light has a direct and measurable impact on your mood, focus, energy levels, and even hormonal balance. This is not metaphorical, it is biological. The brain contains specific neurons that are sensitive to light, particularly blue wavelength light from the sun, which communicates directly with structures deep within the brain that control our circadian rhythm. This rhythm is the internal 24-hour clock that governs when you feel alert, when you feel tired, how your metabolism functions, and when certain hormones are released. Resetting the brain begins with aligning this internal clock, and the single most powerful way to do that is through exposure to natural light in the early part of the day. When light enters your eyes, specifically when sunlight reaches the retina, it activates a set of cells called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. These cells are not responsible for sight in the traditional sense. Instead, they are designed to send a signal to a part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or ASEAN, which is located in the hypothalamus. This region is the master timekeeper of your body. When the ASEAN receives light in the early part of the day, it interprets this as a cue that the day has begun, and it starts orchestrating a complex cascade of biological functions. Cortisol, which is often associated with stress, actually plays a very beneficial role in this context. It rises in the morning to promote alertness, immune function, and metabolism. That morning cortisol peak, however, needs the stimulus of light to occur at the right time. If you miss this window, or if your exposure is too dim or artificial, the brain's rhythm drifts, and you may experience disrupted sleep, low energy, poor focus, or even mood imbalances. Timing matters deeply here. The first 30 to 60 minutes after waking is the ideal time to get exposure to natural light. This is because the brain is in a particularly sensitive state, just coming out of melatonin-driven sleep processes and preparing to enter the cognitive high-functioning part of the day. Sunlight during this window is much brighter than indoor light, even on a cloudy day. Outdoor light in the morning typically provides 10,000 to 100,000 lux of brightness compared to indoor lighting, which usually hovers below 1,000 lux. The intensity of light, along with its full spectrum quality, is what makes it such a powerful signal, and it doesn't require hours. 10 to 15 minutes of exposure on a sunny day, or 20 to 30 minutes on a cloudy one, is usually sufficient. This morning light exposure does more than wake you up. It actually sets a timer in the brain that helps you fall asleep at night. Approximately 14 to 16 hours after that light enters your eyes, your brain will begin to release melatonin, the hormone that promotes sleepiness. In this way, early light doesn't just affect your mornings, it establishes a healthy sleep-wake cycle that influences the entire 24-hour rhythm of your brain and body. Many people struggle with falling asleep not because of a melatonin deficiency, but because they never properly triggered the cascade of signals that begin in the morning. This is one of the simplest, most effective ways to reset the brain, yet it is also one of the least practiced. Another layer to consider is the effect of light on mood and mental health. Studies have shown that individuals who receive regular morning light experience lower rates of depression, improved cognitive performance, and greater emotional regulation. This is in part due to the relationship between light exposure and dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, motivation, and learning. The same retinal cells that influence the circadian clock also project to areas of the brain involved in dopamine release, particularly in the striatum and prefrontal cortex. This means that light isn't just setting your sleep clock, it's modulating the very systems that govern drive, focus, and emotional stability. A lack of light can blunt these systems, leading to symptoms of fatigue, disinterest, or even anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure. Modern life has made it easy to lose touch with these natural cycles. We wake up in dimly lit rooms, step into artificial environments, and often don't see the sun until hours after we've been awake. Compounding the problem, we expose our eyes to bright artificial light, especially blue light, from screens late at night, which sends the brain conflicting signals about when to be alert and when to wind down. This misalignment can have profound effects on brain function over time. But the good news is that the brain is remarkably responsive to change. If you consistently introduce bright, natural light into your morning routine, you begin to recalibrate your brain's internal clock, improve hormone regulation, and support the neural systems that underlie attention, mood, and learning. It's not complicated, but it is crucial. Light is not just a background element in your environment. It is a daily reset tool that your brain has evolved to respond to, and using it strategically may be the most fundamental step toward optimal mental performance. Sleep is not simply a passive state where the body and mind power down. It is an active, highly organized neurological process essential for cognitive restoration, emotional regulation, memory consolidation, and overall mental health. The brain uses sleep to perform critical maintenance functions, removing metabolic waste, resetting neural networks, and consolidating experiences from the day into long-term memory. Despite how vital sleep is, many people underestimate its power or treat it as optional, often sacrificing it in favor of productivity or entertainment. The reality is that without sufficient and high-quality sleep, the brain cannot reset properly. Its ability to process information, regulate emotions, focus attention, and even maintain motivation becomes severely impaired. If the goal is to reset the brain for clarity, resilience, and optimal performance, sleep is not just part of the process, it is the foundation. One of the most important aspects of sleep is its cyclical nature. Sleep occurs in phases: light sleep, deep sleep, and REM rapid eye movement sleep, each serving a distinct function. Deep sleep, which dominates the first half of the night, is associated with physical repair, immune function, and the clearance of neurotoxins via the glymphatic system. REM sleep, which increases in the second half of the night, is crucial for creativity, emotional resilience, and integrating memories and learning. The brain needs to move through these stages in well-structured cycles, typically lasting 90 minutes each. Disruptions to these cycles through poor sleep timing, artificial light exposure, caffeine intake, or stress can prevent the brain from accessing these restorative benefits. Even if total sleep time seems adequate, fragmented or misaligned sleep can leave the brain in a fog-like state the next day. Resetting the brain through sleep requires attention to both quality and rhythm. The most powerful reset signal for the brain is consistent sleep timing. Going to bed and waking up at the same time each day, even on weekends, and trains the brain's circadian system, improving both the depth and efficiency of sleep. This circadian rhythm is governed by a natural rise and fall of hormones like cortisol and melatonin, and this internal timing system needs to be kept on schedule through behavior. Irregular sleep patterns send confusing signals to the brain, which can interfere with sleep onset, reduce sleep quality, and ultimately lead to cognitive and emotional instability. Melatonin, often misunderstood as a sleep hormone, is actually a signal of darkness. Its release is triggered by the absence of light, particularly blue spectrum light. If the eyes are exposed to bright screens or overhead lighting late into the evening, the brain delays melatonin and release, which in turn delays sleep onset. This misalignment can result in social jet lag, a phenomenon where the internal clock is out of sync with the external world, leading to fatigue, irritability, and impaired focus during the day. To support the brain's natural reset process, it's important to reduce artificial light exposure in the evening, especially in the hour before sleep. Dimming lights, using warm color temperatures, and avoiding screens can create a physiological environment conducive to sleep and support the timing of melatonin release. Another key element in optimizing sleep for brain reset is managing temperature and state transitions. The human brain relies on a slight drop in core body temperature to initiate sleep. This is why warm showers or baths before bed can be helpful. They cause peripheral vasodilation, which in turn leads to a cooling of core temperature, signaling the brain that it is time to transition into sleep mode. The sleep environment itself should also be optimized. Cool, quiet, and dark conditions support deeper and more consistent sleep cycles. Small changes in the sleep environment, such as blackout curtains or white noise, can significantly influence sleep depth and duration, especially for individuals living in stimulating or noisy environments. Sleep is also a powerful modulator of emotional processing. During REM sleep, the brain replays emotionally charged experiences and detunes the reactivity associated with them. This is not just psychological, it is neurobiological. The amygdala, a brain structure associated with fear and emotion, becomes less reactive when the brain has had sufficient REM sleep. This is one reason why problems seem more manageable after a good night's rest. The brain has literally recalibrated its emotional response systems. In contrast, sleep deprivation amplifies emotional reactivity, reduces impulse control, and impairs judgment by disrupting prefrontal amygdala communication. When someone is short on sleep, even small stressors can feel overwhelming, and their ability to access rational, goal-directed behavior diminishes. The relationship between sleep and memory is another vital component of brain reset. During deep sleep and REM phases, the brain consolidates newly acquired information, strengthens synaptic connections, and integrates knowledge into long-term memory. This process is essential for learning, problem-solving, and cognitive performance. Without sufficient sleep, the brain struggles to retain new information and retrieve previously stored knowledge. This is why cramming for long hours without rest is counterproductive. The brain simply cannot encode or retrieve information effectively in a sleep-deprived state. Enhancing learning, creativity, and cognitive flexibility requires not just effort but recovery, something that only high-quality sleep can provide. Sleep, then, is not a luxury or a background process. It is the brain's most natural and powerful form of reset, operating on a cellular, neurochemical, and systemic level. Every aspect of cognitive and emotional function, attention, motivation, decision-making, mood regulation, memory, learning, relies on consistent, high-quality sleep. The path to mental clarity and resilience doesn't begin with more information or stimulation. It begins with deep rest, and when the brain is allowed to fully engage in its nightly reset process, the benefits are not just felt, they are wired into its very structure. Stress is an unavoidable part of life, and in short bursts, it can be adaptive, sharpening our focus and helping us respond to challenges. However, chronic stress is fundamentally different. When stress becomes persistent, it alters the brain at both structural and chemical levels, often impairing memory, reducing cognitive flexibility, and increasing emotional reactivity. The primary mechanism behind this is the activation of the hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal HPA axis, which leads to the release of cortisol, the body's main stress hormone. While cortisol can be helpful in mobilizing energy and enhancing alertness in the short term, prolonged elevation disrupts the balance of neurotransmitters and affects regions of the brain critical for decision making, emotional regulation, and learning, particularly the prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and hippocampus. To effectively reset the brain, it's essential to learn how to regulate stress through deliberate, controllable behaviors that shift the nervous system from a sympathetic fight or flight state into a parasympathetic rest and digest state. The autonomic nervous system, which controls involuntary physiological functions, operates like a seesaw. When the sympathetic branch is dominant, heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, and the mind tends to race. When the parasympathetic branch takes over, the body calms, digestion improves, and the brain becomes more capable of introspection, planning, and connection. One of the fastest ways to regain balance in this system is through specific patterns of breathing. Controlled respiration, particularly longer exhales than inhales, has a direct and measurable impact on the vagus nerve, a key component of the parasympathetic nervous system. Practices such as cyclic sighing, where you take a deep inhale followed by an even deeper up inhale and a slow, extended exhale, can reduce anxiety and physiological arousal within minutes. This isn't just psychological, it's a neurophysiological tool for immediate control of stress responses. Physical movement is another potent regulator of stress. Exercise, especially rhythmic, moderate intensity activities like walking, cycling, or swimming, not only helps the body metabolize stress hormones but also promotes neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and rewire itself. During and after movement, the brain releases neurochemicals like dopamine, serotonin, and brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF, all of which enhance mood, focus, and resilience. These chemical changes directly support the reset of neural circuits that may have been overwhelmed by chronic stress. Even a brisk 20-minute walk in natural light can lower cortisol levels, stabilize circadian rhythms, and restore a sense of agency. Importantly, movement provides a form of active coping. It trains the nervous system to oscillate more fluidly between states of stress and calm, rather than getting stuck in high alert modes that deplete mental and emotional energy over time. Equally critical is the role of cognitive framing in stress regulation. The brain interprets stress not only through environmental inputs, but also through the meaning we assign to those inputs. Stress becomes toxic not just because of external circumstances, but because of our internal response, how we perceive and relate to challenges. Cognitive reframing, or changing the narrative around stressors, has been shown to reduce physiological markers of stress and improve performance. When stress is perceived as a signal of growth or a temporary challenge rather than a threat, the brain engages different pathways, emphasizing curiosity and adaptation instead of avoidance and shutdown. This process activates prefrontal circuits that inhibit excessive amygdala activation, thereby reestablishing control and cognitive clarity. Mindset isn't just motivational, it is biochemical. The brain responds differently depending on how we interpret adversity, and training this response is part of resetting its baseline to one of resilience rather than chronic vigilance. Another dimension of stress regulation involves strategic exposure and recovery. The nervous system can be trained to tolerate stress through deliberate challenges that are followed by deep rest. This is known as stress inoculation. Cold exposure, heat exposure, high-intensity interval training, or public speaking are all stressors that, when done voluntarily and followed by recovery, teach the brain to handle pressure without becoming dysregulated. These experiences increase heart rate variability, a biomarker of autonomic flexibility, which is associated with better emotional regulation and cognitive control. The key is to ensure that for every activation there is a counterbalance, intentional rest, breathwork, or sleep, to reinforce recovery. Over time, this teaches the brain that it can move into and out of stress states without getting stuck, which is a core feature of a truly resilient mind. Social connection also plays a powerful role in stress regulation and neural resetting. Human beings are wired for co-regulation. Our nervous systems respond to the tone of voice, facial expressions, and presence of others. Supportive interactions trigger oxytocin release, which dampens stress responses and promotes trust and calm. Even brief moments of shared laughter, eye contact, or physical touch can activate pathways in the brain that counteract the isolating and amplifying effects of chronic stress. The presence of emotionally safe relationships can serve as a buffer, protecting the brain from long-term damage caused by sustained cortisol exposure. In fact, meaningful social connection is one of the most reliable predictors of psychological resilience and longevity, precisely because it resets stress circuits and restores balance in the nervous system. Stress is inevitable, but being chronically dysregulated is not. By learning how to engage the breath, move the body, reframe the mind, expose the system strategically, and connect meaningfully with others, It is possible to not only reduce the impact of stress, but to rewire the brain to respond with greater clarity, flexibility, and calm. Each of these tools is grounded in well-established neuroscience, and together they form a complete protocol for using stress as a catalyst for growth rather than a source of depletion. The key lies in consistency and awareness, creating a feedback loop where the brain no longer reacts reflexively, but responds intelligently. Resetting your brain is not about a single quick fix. It is a comprehensive process that requires intentional habits and an understanding of how your brain operates at its deepest levels. By prioritizing restorative sleep, managing stress through breath and movement, nurturing positive social connections, and maintaining a balanced circadian rhythm, you create the foundation for mental clarity, emotional resilience, and cognitive flexibility. The brain is remarkably adaptable, and with the right tools and consistent practice, you can shift its baseline from fatigue and overwhelm to focus and calm. Embracing these strategies empowers you to take control of your mental state, resetting your brain now to unlock your fullest potential today and every day going forward.